We're moving to Berlin via Canada. But anyway, Rory MacLean is our next guest. Rory.
Thank you, Lucy.
Now, Rory is Canadian, a citizen of the world. He is a former filmmaker. He also worked with David Bowie. And for the past quarter of a century, he's been writing. He's been travel journalist, non-fiction, fiction, teacher, BBC broadcaster. Berlin 1989 brought us together. We met through the BBC, but I have read and loved every single one of Rory's books. He has written 12 books. He's the author of 12 books. The very first one, which is an absolute delight, and I've got my own copy. I want to show you my original copy here, which is the one that Rory signed.
Oh God, that is an original. Oh my God.
See, mine's older than yours.
Yeah.
This is a
delightful 1990s design, isn't that?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's
that would sell by the packet.
Very first 90. Yes, it was 1990, wasn't it? That one, 1991. So that was Stalin's Nose, which Rory's going to read a little bit about, which is a travelogue where he takes a pig through Eastern Europe. He'll tell you all about that. After the fall of the Berlin Wall, then he's written Under the Dragon, Magic Bus, and most recently, well, for us, he has written another book since then, this book, Berlin, which is the most wonderful, wonderful book. It's the portrait of Berlin. It's called Berlin, Imagine a City, and it's a portrait of the city through many, many characters through 500 years of Berlin's history. Now, Rory has lived and worked all over the world, from Berlin to Burma. He's won numerous awards. He's written about missing civilians in the Yugoslav wars. He's written about divided Cyprus. He's written about North Korea. Now, his latest book, Pictures of You, 10 Journeys in Time, is also here for sale. Again, I don't know how you've been so productive over all these years. And
well,
also,
we have a secret.
And you have it. Happy 25th wedding anniversary.
Yes, that too. Thank you.
That
yes,
is. He's rushing back home. He's managed to squeeze that in. So over to you, Rory. It's lovely to have you.
Thank you, Rosie. Thank you. I was just going to do two short readings from, if you like, where it began and where it has arrived to date so far. We all have these moments in our lives, these gifts, these special moments, which hopefully we recognize and capture. And so these are two of the moments here that I'm going to mention. One from the first book, Stalin's Nose, because I was lucky enough, had the good fortune to be in Berlin in November 1989 when the wall came down, and I then from Berlin I made a journey from Berlin to Moscow, through Czechoslovakia, through Hungary, through Romania, to the Soviet Union as it still was, and the wall had just fallen. It was a remarkable time. It was a time of such euphoria, as you all know. In many of the countries, it had been for as long as 60, 70 years, illegal to speak to foreigners, or you had to report every conversation to foreigners. So in this remarkable, remarkable time, people just opened up their hearts and just told their stories to me. And it was, I tried to, in this first book, I tried to capture something of that optimistic time, to explain a little of the history of the other half of Europe, as certainly Canadians and Americans saw it up until 1989, and to record something of the deceit, horror, absurdity, and courage of the previous 50 years. So, I'll just read the first page and a half from Stalin's Nose. This is a non-fiction book, I should point out. Winston the pig fell into Zita's life when he dropped onto my uncle's head and killed him dead. The news reached me in Rostock, drab, damp, and winter grey, where my trip had begun. I had planned to travel from the Baltic to the Black Sea, across the continent's waste, along the line of the old Iron Curtain, but a telephone call changed everything. "It's your uncle," she shouted. The line was bad. I couldn't hear. "He's finally kicked buckets." I caught the train to Berlin and changed for Potsdam. The lost corner of the West had regained its central position, and Europe had reclaimed its East. The wall, which had been open for only a few weeks, was breached in places, like a sandbank by the current, and rivers of people streamed across the false divide. They gathered in pools on no man's land, lapped against the barrier, and wore it away with hammers, then pocketed the detritus as mementos. The late, great division of the world between a capitalist West and a communist East passed away as an historical aberration. Where then, if no longer down this line, was the real end of Europe? The familiar house of white stucco and yellow shutters was hidden from the street by a thicket of hedges. Zita opened the door and Winston, the pig, ran out. The murderer was grinning. "Bloody hell, stop the beast," she ordered over her gums. "He's got my dentures." I dropped my bag and took up the chase. Zita hitched up her morning dress, but the piglet was fast. While he skirted the flower beds, we trampled my uncle's prized snowdrops. I dived for him, missed, and tore up a patch of early crocuses. Winston squealed and grinned. "Not the honeysuckle, please not Peter's honeysuckle." But it wasn't Winston who uprooted the honeysuckle. In response to her cries, Lucifer, the Doberman, emerged from the house barking. Zita pointed at Winston, but the dog, recognizing everyone except me, ignored her and tore my trousers. I fell on the honeysuckle. It was the sort of welcome I had come to expect in Potsdam. Winston disappeared with Zita's teeth into the bracken somewhere in the lower garden. The vista had changed. Slabs of white concrete were stacked in neat piles. Barbed wire had been coiled into tumbleweed balls. The Havel River lapped at the foot of the garden as it had before the Cold War. The Berlin Wall had been removed, greatly improving the view. Zita kicked at the undergrowth. "Yeah, they pulled it down last week." She'd noticed my surprise. "Your uncle was furious. I told him, it's not so bad. Now the animals can reach the water." Then his favorite duck swam off. It's been one of those weeks. "Winston!" she shouted. "I'll fry that ruddy pig when I find him." Her husky voice quivered. Of course, it wasn't really Winston who killed him. It was the loss of a trellis. Since 1979, Peter had grown his prize clematis up the wall. Now a revolution had torn it down. "What a bloody balls up," slurred my aunt, and slumped down on the damp ground and wept. So that was where it began. That was the good luck of being in Berlin in November and December 1989 and then early 1990. And Berlin for me has been, because of its history and my small personal collection with that is something that is, it happens to us all, of course, but because Berlin has changed so much over the years since Berlin for me it really is the capital of revolution. It's, for me, it's not St. Petersburg, it's not Leningrad, it's Berlin. It is a place that has constantly reinvented itself through the years. Its identity, for me, is based not on stability, but on change. It's not struck in aspect like Paris, for example. So 20 years after Stalin's nose, I finally got around to returning to that place, to Berlin, to write about it. And I, as Rosie mentioned, before 1989, in the late 70s, I had, again, one of those gifts you were given. I had the chance to work in West Berlin, as it was, with David Bowie and then also with Marlene Dietrich. And I think out of that experience, I came to understand Berlin through its residents. So those two, Christopher Isherwood from to keep the British perspective, but also Frederick the Great, Katie Kollwitz, the wonderful graphic artist. And so, of course, there are many fantastic histories of Berlin. And I wanted to write a history book that was slightly different and that caught this spirit. And so I decided to do it, as Rosie said, through the portraits of 25 Berliners, German and foreign. And Rosie asked at the beginning, can literature, can the arts change the world? So I thought just this one-page conclusion to the portrait, the chapter I write on David Bowie, might be appropriate to read. So this was actually in 1987, so 2 years before the wall fell. And David Bowie spent most of the time, as I'm sure you know, in 1976, 1977, a bit of 1978 in Berlin. So 10 years after that, 10 years after his departure from Berlin, Bowie returned to the divided city. It was still divided. In June 1987, his driver drove him past the old Hauptstrasse apartment, by the Brücke Museum and Hansa, to a stage in front of the Reichstag. As night fell, he performed to a crowd of 70,000 fans, their sparklers and candles glittering around the Platz der Republik. Towards the end of the show, he read aloud a message in German. Quote, "We send our best wishes to all our friends who are on the other side of the wall." Then he sang Heroes. On the other side of the hateful divide, hundreds of young East Berliners strained to hear echoes of the concert. They caught sight of stage lights flashing off blank, bullet-marked walls. They heard Bowie greet them. They listened to his song, their song, Berlin's song. "We can be heroes, just for one day," he sang in an ironic elegy to both the divided world and his past life. Everyone can be a hero, be their own hero, if only for one day. As Heroes reached its climax, some of the East German crowd pushed towards the Brandenburg Gate, whistling and chanting, "Down with the wall!" They threw insults and bottles at the Volkspolizei, rising together against the party's thugs in a rare moment of protest. On stage, Bowie heard the cheers from the other side. He was in tears. Quote, "It was one of the most emotional performances I've ever done," he said later. "It was breaking my heart. I'd never done anything like that in my life, and I guess I never will again. That's the town where it was written, and that's the particular situation that it was written about. It was just extraordinary." So it is that the creative spirit transforms the world, flowing forth from the mouths and pens of poets, painters, and songwriters. A gift of talent is bestowed on an artist, and he or she labors in its service. The fruit of their toil is then offered to us all, and it, in turn, can awaken our individual gift or dream. Through wonder works like 5 Years, Ashes to Ashes, and Sag mir wo die Blumen sind, artists give themselves to us in the same way that we are given all that is truly precious in life. Hoarfrost, the taste of apples, a lover's laughter, favorite melodies. In Berlin, Schinkel fought to realize his vision. Katie Kollwitz struggled to shape her fears. Christopher Isherwood, living on a tutor stipend, reworked reality. And Bowie made his journey from addiction to independence, from celebrity paranoia to radical, unmasked messenger who told us all the fat, skinny people, all the nobody people, that we were beautiful, that we could be ourselves.
Very, very moving.